All in favor?
The audio is not super great for the people who are attending online. So would you mind just going through and taking roll so we can document this here?
Here. Steve Gardner. Here. Nicholas Gardner. Greg Weaver. Here. Martin Reynolds. Here. And from staff, we have Sandy, Senator virtually, Gretchen Thomas, Senator virtually, Mike Lawrence from Econ, is there anyone from the public waiting in the wings anywhere? No. There being no members from the public, the next thing we need to do is approve the minutes from either down here. Approve minutes from last month or the last week we had, which on September 20th. There are motion to approve those minutes. Or first of all, there's anybody having questions? Okay, the neighbor. So, motion to approve minutes. Make a motion to approve the minutes. We have a second. Second that. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Nicholas, you can vote too.
Here's the club.
We're voting to approve the minutes from last meeting. You approve? And yeah, I guess yeah. Well, anyway, I guess we're majority anyway. So, all right. So we're on to the update on the 2050 long range transportation plan. And CTAC involved.
Sure, yeah. Can you hear me, Nicholas? Or anybody else want to listen or Gretchen? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's kind of muffled.
Okay, well.
I can hear Sandy just fine, but everyone else is very muffled and it's quite garbled.
Yeah.
Well, we'll move the owl a little bit closer to the rest of the room, but just be mindful that the sound is not great and project towards the cameras as much as possible.
I just want to say that it's the same thing for me.
Okay.
And while we're on the sound part of this, I did miss, because it was garbled, who made the motion for the minutes and who seconded. If you could. I made the motion for this morning. Okay, thank you.
And I, Lucas Bean, seconded.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so the first kind of fun part about the long range transportation plan is that based on what you all told us, we should not call it a long range transportation plan. So we conducted a little activity with our staff to brainstorm different names, and the big reveal is and moving towards 2050. That's what we're going to call it. So I think this is the logo that was just recently fresh off the presses as of yesterday. That's the little logo design that we're going to be using. We'll probably take the hyphen out between long range because I typically have a hyphen in there, but otherwise, final of a brand new long range transportation So thanks for providing that feedback, and it was a fun little activity for our staff to go through to think through what the importance of the long-range transportation plan. So I want to talk about public and stakeholder engagement with you all. As most of you know, we went through a process to retain some consultants to provide general support and technical guidance in a few key areas of our long-range transportation plan. And so we did end up recruiting EPR consultants who are who have Kelly Horn as a sub. So that's a really good combination for our area because they're people who are familiar with their area. EPR has a lot of public engagement expertise on long-range transportation plans, and then Kelly Horn for a lot of the technical expertise aspects. So that's going to be really helpful as part of our long-range transportation plan. So after talking to them, they helped us sort of think through what the appropriate type of engagement might be for different parts of our plan development. And so I'm just going to go through this with you to sort of define how we're going to be conducting stakeholder engagement. Now some of this we went through before as part of the planning process itself. This is just going to be a little bit more specific about why we're recommending the types of engagement that are being recommended at the different phases. So the first phase of this is to really define the goals and objectives. So after talking to the consultants, what they recommended is that there's probably a really important, there are really important stakeholders that have a vested interest in what happens as part of this long-range transportation plan that are not going to be participating through the MPO process. And so part of getting that engagement up front is going to be to help make sure that these perspectives are represented as we define the goals and objectives for the long-range transportation plan, to make sure that we don't have any major blind areas, or we're not missing any key factors that need to be considered. And so those are places like not the development community necessarily, but private businesses to represent the economic interest. Those are things like equity priority communities. So people that are able to speak to the needs from historical communities, or communities that are covered by our Title VI plan requirements, or communities that have some sort of barrier where transportation presents a barrier. We want to make sure that those perspectives are also considered as we sort of develop the framework for what the transportation plan would occur or would cover. It also includes, I think there are a lot of safety considerations that go beyond just the transportation planning and engineering side. So there are some of those professionals that could speak to some of those factors, and then there are also what I would generally classify that seems to be in Charlottesville largely about environmental interests, but I guess like special interest groups. So they have like some advocacy philosophies that have really important things to say about what this plan means for the environment and how to make sure that we're meeting the environmental goals. So there's a need to make sure that some of these perspectives are represented in the process, and to make sure that that is built into that framework. After talking to the consultants, what they suggested is that the best way to do that is going to be to use small focus groups where you can have a really well facilitated conversation, because we're talking about abstract ideas. It's going to be hard to have good conversations with the public at large. So they suggested have some of these conversations with some of these stakeholder groups early in the process to make sure that that's informing the development of your goals and objectives. So that's going to be our first phase, and we'll talk a little bit later about who should participate in those communities and whether those are the right stakeholders. But that's going to be the first phase. The other thing that this does is by using these focus groups early on is that we develop an engagement with representatives from these communities that can help guide us on how we can best engage with those communities in an ongoing effort. So, so we want to talk to people who are parts of nonprofits or or business communities or things like that, that can help us know if we want to make sure that we have these perspectives represented in the larger public engagement, what is the best way that we can do to conduct outreach to those communities? And they can help us identify those strategies. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Well, more of a suggestion, and that is that the CTAC be represented in those focus groups. We have enough members that we could spread out just one of us at focus group, just to be able to report back to the CTAC what that particular focus group's concerns were and so forth. Just get, perspectives so we can see those perspectives.
Like as a liaison kind of? Yeah. Okay.
Just a suggestion, but gives us some involvement. Sitting on the side.
So yeah, question. Things said, will these be open sessions?
They would not.
So then what he said is pretty important.
Sure. Yeah. And that's not because we're not trying to be transparent. Yeah.
The focus groups are
Yeah, I don't know if there's a best practice on that or not. I have no issues recording it as long as that's not maybe a barrier for participation for anybody.
The key thing in focus groups, you don't want anyone interfering with the flow of conversation, injecting something and kind of swaying the conversation. If there's someone from CTAC in there, they should be silent or
But on that note, is the consultant providing a facilitator, like a proper facilitator for all of these sessions?
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk to them about it because I think the expectation is that that's something that our staff would be doing, but they would work with us on developing the sort of the like framework for that. So I think that. Yeah, I think one of the questions that came up in MPO Tech yesterday that you might have picked up on, Donna, was like whether or not this is going to be a true focus group or whether it's going to be more of like a stakeholder discussion. And I think that depends a little bit on, as we work with the consultant, what we define that we want to get out of it. The ones that I've seen were pretty like open-ended. So it might be that this is more like a facilitated small group or discussion, not a true focus group, but yeah, we'll work on that.
Well, there really is a difference between discussion group and someone in a focus group. So you really need to be clear on what.
Yeah, and we'll define what we hope for the outcomes to be prior to conducting the meetings. I think the important thing is that we really want to make sure that these lenses are represented in the early stages of the process. Any other questions? Let's get feedback. Okay. So then after we define the goals and objectives, that's where kind of we started talking that we would do like a big broad public engagement. So we'll use the compacts that we developed through the focus groups or the stakeholder discussion groups to help us sort of guide some more targeted or specific efforts. But generally, this is where we're going to open it up and really try to do the broad outreach to help make sure that everybody knows what the long-range transportation plan is, have public meetings where people can come and learn, identify some of those public intersect opportunities, and then we'll also conduct a survey. So this is kind of combining two different phases of the project itself into one outreach activity. And this is also based on guidance from the consultants. Because basically what they told us is that it's going to be easier for the public to sort of help make decisions about predetermined alternatives. So we're going to have these goals and objectives that have been defined through the MPO committees and have been vetted through these stakeholder groups that we've identified. The public can then help inform, what most resonates with their values as far as what's important to them about the transportation system. And then there's also going to be an opportunity for them to say, and this is where I see that we have problems with the community, this is where I see an opportunity for improvement. So we're kind of combining those into one significant outreach opportunity. I think my initial thought was that we would prioritize the goals, and then we would rank, do a ranking of the needs in the transportation system, and then go back to the public. But instead, it feels like it's a little bit more of an efficient process to ask the public where they see the needs up front. And then our ranking process for prioritizing the needs for the system deficiencies would be able to also put what's prioritized as far as the quantitative analysis next to what the public has, where the public has identified needs, and to see those two side by side, which will create like a fuller picture of, you know, what does the data show, what is the public perception, and then we can kind of put this together.
So, you know, the Albemarle County is doing a comp plan.
Mm-hmm.
And when they started a little bit, there's a number of reasons that it's slowed down, but they had something like the way you described it,
Mm-hmm.
where they had proposed different objectives for the comp plan and then asked for public feedback, but they weren't so restricted to just those things. They also encouraged the public to provide additional comments or additional ideas, and usually keep it the same. Don't make it so strict. Here are the 5 things that we want you to comment on. What else do you want to add, or what else do you think might be useful?
Well, I think that's going to come up when we do the public meetings. I think as far as the survey is concerned, though, we're probably going to stick to having a predetermined list. And then if people want to provide additional comments, you know, there will be a comment form on the website or things like that. Yeah.
But even in person, you have meetings.
Oh yeah, and well, I think even if we wanted to limit it in person, I don't think we'd be able to. Yeah. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Before we leave this slide, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Oh, before we leave this slide, has any decision been made on how the survey will be done?
I mean, I haven't started putting a survey together at all. I was thinking about, I think there are some MetroQuest is probably the way I was going to go, but did you have a specific question or preference that you wanted to voice? Can you hear me, Nicholas? Can you hear me, Nicholas?
Yeah, sorry, I missed it. I missed what you were saying. But please just go on. The sound is very muffled. I'm not hearing clearly. So go on.
Yeah. Hold on, I'll message you. Sorry. One of the really nice things about MetroQuest, I haven't designed a survey, we could certainly do something different if people have strong preferences, but part of the support that they provide is that they translate it into other languages, like one of the functions of it. I don't think that in our area there's substantive population for people who speak languages other than Spanish, so I think we'll probably translate it into Spanish unless there's like specific requests to translate it into other languages.
Could we request for CTAC to be part of the pilot survey feedback?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any interface with the IRC, for example, the international? They're asking.
They are on the list of like people to include, at least to reach out to for the like stakeholder focus group. So we'll talk about that. But and it's also possible when we talk to those groups that they'll say for our community to participate, this is what we would need. And so some of this is kind of up in the air, but based on the analysis that we're required to do for the federal compliance. It looks like, and I'm not sure, Ryan, I don't know that we actually need any thresholds where we're required to do this, but it makes sense for our area that there's a significant enough community that at least relies on Spanish speaking services to go ahead and proactively translate it into Spanish.
As far as other languages, is it mostly a cost thing, or is it just an access thing?
Well, I mean, part of it is just the. I mean, there is a cost associated with translating it, like not just the MetroQuest survey, but translating all of our materials and providing those services into other languages. And I think you know, if there's a specific request, we're required to meet it. But it's just a question of, you know, is there really demand to participate in this from the other communities? And if there is, we want to meet it. But it is a significant cost to do that if there's not a, you know, interest in participating.
And just note that from the meeting we just attended a meetup earlier, they were looking at the completion rate by language type on surveys by MetroQuest, and so the ones that were sent out in English had a much higher completion percentage of like 50% compared to the ones sent out. I think Spanish was the example given, it was like less than 10%. Yeah. So that is to say that survey is not necessarily the best tool to get feedback from every community, and that even though we can translate it into as many languages as we want, the best way to solicit feedback from some of these other communities may not be through survey.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, that's where engaging some of these other stakeholders really will help us know like what is the best way to get feedback from those communities. That was a very helpful meeting that you just attended. It's fresh on my mind.
In fact, they mentioned a lot of it being about that actually need to be invited and participate.
Yeah.
That was the way to really make it right.
Sure. Yeah. And we, you know, maybe, unfortunately for Lucinda, but fortunately for me, we had a lot of experience, or she has a lot of experience now knowing how to engage with communities through the transit vision plan. So she's able to provide a lot of feedback too from, you know, what she learned through that process. So thanks for being proactive, Lucinda. All right. So then the next step that we're going through, so we're going to prioritize the goals. We're going to rank the you know, goals and objectives. We're going to take the public feedback that we hear about where they see that there are system improvement needs. We're going to put those together. And ultimately what we're going to end up with is a list of prioritized needs that are going to help us also start identifying the projects that need to be prioritized. So once we get to the project prioritization phase, that's where we're going to do another pretty significant round of public engagement to start getting feedback. So we're going to tell the public, we heard you, this is what you said your goals and objectives were and how important they were. These are the solutions that we came up with, and these are what the priorities are based on what we heard from you all. And basically ask for their input at that point. Did we get it right? How does this feel? Does this feel like it meets your needs? Does it not feel like it meets your needs? I don't know exactly what the questions are that we're going to ask, but that's generally what we're trying to gauge at that point and say, we've gone through this process. Now what's your feedback? What do you like? What do you not like? So that's when we're going to have this opportunity to do this another set, reach out to some of those same groups that we reached out to for that first round of feedback to identify the priorities in the first place, and to follow back up with them and to kind of close that loop. So we'll do another set of public meetings. We'll do another set of public intercepts with those same communities. And we'll have an open public comment period where people will be able to review the recommendation and provide feedback. It's possible that this is going to be an iterative process where we prioritize projects, get some feedback, reprioritize projects, get some feedback. You know, I think it tends to be kind of iterative at that point, but there will be another opportunity for the public to really sort of help provide another opportunity to vet what the outcomes are based on the process that we've been.
How long do you think the first two phases, each phase will take, or maybe the first two phases? This is what's the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think, you know, I have a Gantt chart. I think we can probably finish this phase up probably by next June.
This phase.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to get to a point where we're we at least like get through the first round of public engagement by June. Yeah, and so then we'll work to start getting some priorities. And my hope is that probably, you know, I think I think the hope is that we might even finish earlier than that, so that we can start looking at the prioritization process and see what the outcomes are.
So then, you would expect to have a fair list of priorities probably at the end of next year.
A vetted list of priority projects. I think we'll be working through it at that point. Let's fingers crossed, yeah. Yeah. And so then the final step in the public engagement process is going to not be that impactful, but it is a requirement, so we have to make sure that we have a required public hearing. But the hope is that by the time we get to the point where we have the public hearing on the adoption of the plan itself, there's been enough of a public process up to that point that you know, we've heard at least any significant feedback that needs to be incorporated. So, any other questions or comments on that? All right. So a couple of things that do you want to minimize? Can you like minimize that?
You're not going to take vacation now for next year, is that right?
I don't think so. I don't know. The question is Ryan. Yeah.
Actually, the other question I had this.
Yeah.
Hopefully this makes sense, but I'm wondering, so with the focus groups, more than likely, some of the focus groups are going to be at odds. For instance, the you're talking to downtown business folks, you know, they're going to have a strong emphasis probably on parking, for instance, versus the folks, environmental folks who are not. And you also are going to have a lot of, I would say also like folks who tend to benefit from well, I'm not that, but like, you're gonna, I imagine gonna collect demographic information or try to entertain these surveys, right? So is there any kind of weight given to those kind of things, like whether for demographics, since one of the goals is to like serve underserved communities, or like the broader goal, for instance, is like impacting climate change and tying into the climate action plans of the city and the county. Do responses that tie into that have a certain weight to them versus like the business community, to these them again, who are like, we need parking, but we know that that's like not, you know, something that's antithetical to like the work that's being done for climate action.
Yeah, so a couple things that I think is important to remember is that the stakeholders that are going to be engaged in this process are not actually defining the goals and objectives, they're informing the goals and objectives. So all of that is going to go through our staff, and we'll come back to you all as an advisory committee, MPO as an advisory committee, and the policy board, ultimately to determine like what are the overall values that we want to support in this plan. So that is more information so that we know what are the needs and what does it make sense for this plan to address. The other thing is that as far as the prioritization, none of this is prioritized right now. So we're basically just defining like what our value statements are. And then through this broader public engagement process, we'll start working at how do we weight these different goals against each other. So, so I don't think there's a concern that like one group is going to sort of like add down another just by their verbal, statement of needs. I think it's more about like, we want to make sure that if there are needs that support business, and maybe some of them are contradictory, and then that's a conversation that we need to have, and that's a policy decision that we need to make. But we need to make sure that that's incorporated into how we make our decisions. Yeah. Okay. So as we're talking about public engagement, these are a couple of questions that I think it might be helpful for us all to work through together. And that's, we get through this process. What does it look like to say that this process was successful as far as the public engagement efforts? So there are a number of ways that you can evaluate these. I put some up on the slide, but that doesn't mean that those are the only ones. But if you were going to define success for public engagement or the moving toward 2050 plan, how would you define that?
Well, I mean, I think the measure of success would be if you get to the final stage where you have the public hearings and you get a lot of people there, but they're supportive as opposed to, hey, this doesn't make any sense. So both quantity and census would be the measure of success. Now, at that point, you're already done with the process. So, if you didn't get it right, you'll know then. But it's at the end where you'll know whether you're successful.
I think that's pretty tricky because a lot of times the people who come out are the ones that need their voices to be heard. And so by that point, the people who come out are going to be more motivated if they don't agree with the plan than people who do agree. So it's probably not representative. I think this is a better measure to say that before we set the goals, did we hear from enough people and people that represent the community? Like, do the demographics reflect the overall demographics of the region? And if that's a yes, then I don't know if that consensus later is, I don't know how you would measure that,
I don't know. I do love a boring meeting though, so I'm not sure where you're
People have the opportunity to be here, and they feel that they're being listened to, even though they may not get everything they wanted with the plan. They might at least say, I understand the limitations, and that's what you're certainly hoping.
Yeah.
So is there a way to solicit as part of the feedback other groups or representative populations? That's something we suggest reaching out to, and once you run out of unique examples, that could be one sort of feedback mechanism.
Yeah, I mean that could be. So one of the things that we don't necessarily have to do these discussion groups. We could also do stakeholder interviews, for example. But that could also be one thing we ask at the end of whatever that process is. Is there anybody else we should be talking to?
Your first two bullets are really numerical in some respect, most respects. And I think that's what you need to do at that stage. If you just want to say, have we reached out? How much have we reached out in terms of public engagement? So number received maybe versus number of attendees, or number of attendees. Yes. You might be like that. It's easy. Demographics, we know what the demographics are in the county and the city. That's what was in our handout that we sent through. So we have to measure against actual participants. I'm not sure how you may have to take a survey. I'm going to run the numbers and trying to see if there's a meaningful incorporation to emphasize the meaningful rules.
Sure.
I think those are the rep for if you wanted to add something as the, you could say something like you refer to best practices in community engagement, that you reference things that have happened before that it's successful, and then making a statement that we didn't make this up, that new, you reference something that hasn't been successful, that kind of don't make the statement that we did due diligence to know how to go about this.
I would also say that because the first two are rather quantitative, it's pretty important to establish what that means, like in terms of numbers, before we start the engagement process. Sure. Okay, like maybe it's really difficult to get responses. You want to do it. You want to think I go ahead of time. That's fair.
Yeah, and that those best practices could be, hey, 25% of the population is a win, where you might think, well, that's not good at all, but maybe that actually is what it is.
So do you all want to define what those goals are, or do you, or is that like, or you just want us to?
No, I think it's out there. I hope that students have a year of best practices to make public engagement on community projects. There must be metrics out there that we would reference.
Okay.
I do like the demographics, because you do have the demographic numbers. And so you want to see similar percentage, or at least some small percentage of each of the demographics in terms of income, education, or race, whatever. Yeah, all three. I think this is one.
Representative surveys.
Right. But I mean, EPR on the course condition, I pretty good idea what good is in terms of.
The EPR is the one who told me that I should be asking you all what you wanted.
Actually, in the Metro Quest surveys that have been put out, not all of them ask for specific demographic data. So we should make sure that that's actually in the survey.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, and so it's a little bit hard because, obviously we want to collect the data, but it's easier on the survey when people can decide whether or not they want to report that versus, sometimes in person, it's a little bit harder to determine how to collect that information.
Also, my impression of complicated reporting and the spirit thing was
okay. My note is going to say, how can we warn it on the phone?
Excuse me?
I said my note is just going to say, see how can we warn it for the Belmont Bridge.
Yeah. I'm not making any promises, but I do taxes, done taxes, yes, for AARP. And they collect demographic information. I'll try to go through a deep dive there and just say, give you a sense of my sense is, because I fill out the demographics too as each return. We ask people ethnicity, income, something for houses, people, or military or not. And I would say, so I've done this for 3 years now. I get about 50% of the people respond, give you the information. And that's for AARP's own, records, because they want to do some analysis how much of the population they're reaching out to. Yes, I can try to get a sense that I should know they're willing to share that. My recollection of the public outreach that Albemarle County conducted on the small area plan by 29 was, I guess it made about 1%. Just judging people that showed up to the meetings, form-based code and stuff like that. Probably 1% would be an optimistic response rate. But yeah, if you get anywhere close to 1%, I think you. Well, this is maybe a little bit more understandable in the form-based. Well, yeah, meetings all of it. You get rid of the junk. I'm saying about 200 people responded out of roughly 20,000 in that general area.
Yeah, 1% might be about 1,200 people. That feels like maybe a aspirational but accomplishable goal.
Well, we can get a number.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Some years back, four base code, and they had a farm. 120 people were in the imps. Screaming, yelling, even tears. All the place. And I remember thinking that the number of people in the Bridge Street neighborhood, 140 people there, 160. So again, for 1.3% or something. People don't really know.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty good figure. It works, and the metrics.
Yeah.
What are the other, like, I know you've done a lot of surveys. What kind of numbers do you get?
Well, I've done one other Metro Quest survey, and I think that one was so that's the other thing, is it just kind of on what we propose out of this process as to how, like, you know, how strongly people feel about it. The Urbana Reference survey got about, like, I think it was like 820 responses, which again, people felt very strongly about that. But a lot of I mean, I don't think that that's actually very common for the long range transportation plans for like that I've seen that other places have done. To have that necessarily high level of responses. So I think you know, maybe 0.5% might be a more attainable goal. That's still a pretty like substantive or representative of the community of thinking about that. I think good survey responses on these for like the more general long range transportation plans are probably around 400 or 500 in a lot of places. But that's just a survey that doesn't incorporate, you know, all the other opportunities for engagement that might capture other populations that won't take a survey.
We have a catch your name now, so it's gonna do better.
Yeah, exactly. And a pretty slick logo that I did not design, just for the record. We've had a yeah, our survey is going to be easier to take, and everybody's going to know how to do it. So once they start it, they're going to want to complete. Okay. All right. So the focus groups / stakeholder discussion groups, we had a conversation about this with MPO CTAC. So the way I group these together in my mind was sort of what frame of reference would these people be coming together to speak from. So the idea isn't necessarily that we would have a focus group around economic development or a focus group around safety, but that we would have a conversation about the goals and objectives, making sure that people who are looking at them from these different lenses would be able to speak to the process of maybe what's missing or what doesn't sit right with them or what they would like to add. In MPO Tech, they suggested that potentially it might make more sense to have focus groups that weren't organized around sort of like the type of people that are participating, but around topic areas that everybody would sort of like be speaking to. So instead of having one focus like that where we invite business communities to participate, have one where we talk about economic development. So there are different ways to do that. Either way could work. It might change the way some of these groups are organized, but I'd love feedback on whether or not these are the right stakeholders to be including. And then if you have any thoughts on the structure of that, that's also certainly something that would be helpful. Yeah.
This do have a representative, you would have one person for each bullet, and you have a part of it like a focus group less effective for X number.
Yeah, I think 12 would probably be the high limit. Also keep in mind that none of these people have committed to participating. So yeah.
I'm thinking that maybe if that's your perspective list, then we should probably have 2 groups for each topic then, so that it's more like 6 people or 6 to 8 people rather than 12 or more, because meetings tend to be more effective with and you know, they can, you know, especially if we're there as observers, we can compare notes between the two different groups of which topic and, you know, see what they said that was similar and what they said was different.
Well, the other thing is you could break up some of these into two groups within the same area. Is that what you were saying, right? The other thing that struck me is how about high school?
Yeah, that actually came up in MPO Tech too. So if you see under the safety professionals.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah. But no, it was not. So yeah, but that came up in that MPO Tech. I forgot to put an asterisk by it. An asterisk by the ones that MPO Tech also suggested that were on my original list. I forgot to put an asterisk there.
And churches.
Well, we
see in that help. So that's a sort of special things.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I think the more general. So I did First Baptist Church because they helped us with the transit vision plan, and they have a good connection to the they have a Black community church, and so they provide a connection to that demographic of people. So I included them for that reason. I think as far as more general outreach, their churches might be in that more general you know, public outreach versus unless there are ones that are also well connected to the community that could help us reach some of the equity priority communities the system does.
Are groups related to transportation not specifically included because they'll be, you know, incorporated in a different part of the process?
Like what?
Just because here you listed the bus driver under like the safety professional, but what about the school district in general, thinking about planning bus routes?
Yeah, I think we intended to invite them to that to participate in like the MPO technical committee, like as part of that discussion. But yeah, it is. Yeah.
Do you plan on maybe tweaking this a little bit, setting it, or is it? Are you going to think about having a more open call? I think about, again, if you're going to make one or two big organizations, there's another maybe church program. They didn't have the opportunity, or I guess I'm curious. I don't know that I have a suggestion on how to navigate that. Similarly with like the special interest groups.
Yeah, well, I think that's why we're having a conversation here. So you all, and again, we're not necessarily trying to be exclusive, and it doesn't mean that others won't have the opportunity to participate. Again, this is helping us make sure that we are seeing things through the lens of stakeholders that don't necessarily have an opportunity to provide feedback like you all are doing right now. So part of that process might be to like how do we reach out to other communities that are similar to yours.
I feel like you could put out like an early open call and even like soliciting the folks you have here who might be missing.
I don't know if it makes sense to do an open call for that or not. I don't know. Does anybody else have thoughts on that?
What about like linkages to other modes, like Amtrak or the airport? Is that going to be represented through like MPO Tech?
I think those might make more sense as like individual interviews. Yeah, and I know that economic development has already spoken or told me about the airport. We actually might have a little bit of a challenge finding the right connection for Amtrak, but I think it would make sense for.
So how about, let me just, I saw the Virginia Institute for the Blind, and CAC recently had the Autism Institute, which has, and that might be an interesting. Also, to me, what bothers me about the list is very, let's see, central oriented. I don't want to say downtown, but Albemarle County is pretty big.
Yeah.
And I assume the transportation covers the entire county, right?
The MPO area.
And I don't know where to reach out, you know, in more rural areas. But I just don't see it in this list. I don't, something doesn't.
No, it covers the MPO area, not the entire
But which is how far out? It's LP, yeah.
Yeah, So basically covers along 29
Yeah.
to a little bit south of 64 and up to Greene County, and then it covers almost all of 64 east. It goes west to Crozet, and then it goes out to the county line in the east.
On the east, it goes to the county line.
Mhm.
So basically following the main transportation routes, 29 and 250. Let me go out 250. I go out the polo grounds, the soccer association. They have a lot of people that are coming around the country. I'm just trying to throw out some areas.
Mm-hmm.
I just get this feeling, even the way you describe it.
Do you think? Well, let me ask you this then, Marty. Would it make sense? Do they need to be participating as far as like defining the goals and objectives, or do you think maybe part of what would feel better about that is if we did some specific public engagement out in those areas?
Well, they, to me, it's different to say.
Mm-hmm.
Around but they're the big views as you go out in the county, that's the transportation, those are the drivers, right? And so you want to find out what the needs are, how to address them, how to provide all the transportation. And these organizations are going to focus, just like we said, on parking and then the environment. That's sort of.
I don't really see any of those that are exclusive to downtown.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would consider adding, if you want to engage neighborhood associations, that could be.
Yeah,
They're going to be there.
They're going to be there.
well, I think that makes sense in that more general, like public, feedback round. I think that makes sense.
And then you list UVA, but you can also consider BCC.
Oh yeah.
While you're at it, on things actually, I just think about the urbanization. Huge report, and you were making me think about things in the end. I thought about Crozet, because you have all the Crozet is its own little world out there as far as transportation goes. I don't know. I mean, just that's an interesting thing. And then as far as the really large employers, the northern end of that, that might be an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I didn't include any private businesses in this list, but the economic development departments have sent me like who the top employers are. Yeah.
Crozet is an interesting thing. Yeah, I don't know. None more, we're not building any appointments out there anyhow. But Crozet is, I don't mean to quote me on that, but Crozet is an interesting kind of thing.
Yeah.
Also thinking about maybe habitat. I know like Southwood, for example, I don't know how to reach people there, but that would be a big population.
Yeah. So also international neighbors on top of the fires.
Okay.
And I don't know if you picked up this, I really came up with Conrad. I didn't see that up there. And just you kind of was uploaded it yesterday, so in case that one slipped by.
Yeah, there's another one. Yeah. So if you remember that somebody writing about it, really good method in my class.
Yeah, CAAR, the builders.
Yeah, I did.
And then Andre is really sort of the developer.
I'm pretty sure it's the low income. Any idea what that is?
What's the low income?
Anybody? What's that?
Low income housing coalition.
Oh, maybe.
It was far, it was on there. Yeah, mentioned. Well, are they up there?
Office up there, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, click, I guess.
I didn't put a star. Okay. Okay.
Are there any union level things that you business?
I don't know. I know the city in the past. I don't. Yeah. If you think of any, yeah.
One more maybe. We're doing a supportive housing.
I'm gonna flip the screen. I need class.
One upstairs.
So we'll talk about the goals, objectives, and metrics, and just maybe my full time, so that's about 7:55. So just know that this is not necessarily the only time we'll be able to talk about it, but this will give you all a chance to provide initial feedback before we start talking to the stakeholders about this. All right. So as far as the goals and objectives and metrics are concerned, I think it's really important that we start by keeping the end in mind. So the outcome of this long-range transportation plan that we're required to produce is a list of transportation projects. So it's a little bit different than some of these other planning efforts that we're doing right now, where or that you all might be doing, like as far as the comprehensive planning or other plans, where you're sort of defining, you know, these are the different values that are important to our communities, and this is the set of strategies that we're going to use to reach those goals. Really, what the goals and objectives and metrics in the long-range transportation plan are going to do is they're going to help us determine how important are each of these different values in selecting the projects that we think are going to be the most important for our region to pursue. So the output of this whole goals, objectives, and metrics evaluation process is going to be one set of projects. So the goals and objectives will inform how the projects are prioritized. The goals are the general value statements, so this is what's important to our community. These are the things that we value, and then the objectives are what it looks like to accomplish this goal. So those are things that are more measurable, that help you know that you are making progress towards achieving this goal. And then the metrics are what we use to evaluate. So they're kind of the technical side of the goals and objective statements that help us look for indicators for how well our projects are going to support the identified goals and objectives. It's possible that, did you have a question?
Yeah, just for the sake of this, transportation is defined as any way that moving a person or goods from one place to another. I mean, it's very broad in the sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it probably covers everything except for like broadband. Yeah. In broadband, maybe it's stretch. So it's possible that through this process, as we have some of these discussions with the community, that it's possible that there will be objectives that are identified that can't be translated directly to a metric that's not technical. And so if that's the case, then we'll work with consultants to figure out how do we incorporate those objectives as considerations in our project coordination process. But to the extent possible, we want to try to be able to create a process that can quantify as many of these objectives as possible as far as evaluating our project. So the general process is that you all, as the MPO, as an MPO advisory committee, are going to help vet the draft goals and objectives. We'll take those out to the public, and then we'll take this public feedback and create a final set of goals and objectives once we get this public feedback from the stakeholder groups incorporated as well, because I can guarantee that they are going to find things that at least I did not consider. So this was these were the draft goals and objectives that I had developed to start an initial conversation, and then MPO TAC had made some suggestions as well. So they generally cover, so again, the general goal statements are like the values. This is what's important to us for our transportation system to accomplish. We want it to be safe. We want it to be environmentally friendly. We want it to promote equity and accessibility of the system. We have goals around incorporating the transportation system with our land use planning and supporting economic development. And then we want to improve the travel efficiency and system reliability. MPO TAC had wanted to increase the I guess the efficiency goal to make sure that it was clear that that was not just a roadway transportation improvement to support single occupancy vehicles, but that it would support all modes. So I moved a few things around there in the efficiency category to help kind of try to strengthen that goal. But in general, those are kind of the categories that we generally use, and these are pretty common among all plans. How they're grouped together is a little bit different. So a couple of things that are different. I used the previous long range transportation plan as a baseline. A couple of things that are different is that I pulled the equity and accessibility grouping out because it seems like there's a lot more emphasis in the local area, as well as coming from the federal highway administration and the federal transit administration priorities. There's a lot more focus on equity and environmental justice. So wanted to pull out equity to strengthen that as a goal in its own right. And I also pulled out environment to strengthen that goal in its own right. So, so the groupings are a little bit different from previous plans, but the overall sort of, you know, categories are pretty similar. So, initial thoughts on this. Do you want to go through them maybe one by one and talk about each one briefly? Thank you.
Obviously, the second question of Grace earlier, equal weight each one.
This will be where we do the public engagement to help us define how much of a weighting to give to the different factors. My instinct is that probably what will likely have a lot of weight associated with it will be the safety and equity categories, and then probably the other ones will have less of an emphasis. I think one of the things that's really interesting is if you look at the 2040 plan, for example, it was pretty much completely a system capacity plan. So it was really looking at, you know, improving efficiency and system operations. And my instinct is that probably efficiency will not be not resonate as significantly to people as it did previously, but I think we'll do some public engagement. Ultimately, the policy board will help us determine, you know, what weighting to give to the different categories. But yeah.
Is it meant to be intentionally like mode agnostic? I see things like mode choice and multi-mode. Or could it not be that the community says we exclusively want water public transportation, or we would have to increase like head as a goal?
Yeah, so I think maybe I think maybe that goal is built into the process. So so for example, you know, when we talk about the safety, we're going to be able to say it's more important to us, or we want to prioritize the safety for bike and ped users more than we prioritize the safety for roadway users, for example. Like that's going to sort of be dependent on how we prioritize each of these goals and weigh these goals against themselves. I think what's really hard about this plan is that if you start defining what your desired outputs are at this phase, you really sort of, how do I explain this? Like again, the goal is to help us develop a process where we can evaluate one kind of project against the other kind of project. So it's hard to set a goal that says we want to prioritize multimodal projects, and then have that goal relate to like a quantifiable measure that will help us determine how we prioritize it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
So one thing that could be challenging, assuming this is kind of the starting point for eventually the rubric that you will evaluate projects on.
Yeah.
Even though I'm a huge supporter of multimodal travel, here there are many instances where you basically have double counting, right? So you have increased mode choice for all users, but then above that, increased use of alternative modes of transportation. So if you were to actually evaluate this quantitatively, even though you're giving two separate weights, you know, like the input you're putting in to evaluate that is the same for both of those things. So that would end up getting counted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Yeah, it makes sense. And I think the way that the way this is translating into a metric is actually different for each of these categories. So, but I think the other thing that's hard is sort of, you know, the objective is kind of the in between like what you can actually measure and like how people are able to inform what you should measure. You know, so it makes sense that the objective should be what the public would be able to provide feedback on. And then we need to be able to translate that into something quantifiable almost. But yeah, that's something, and that is something that the consultants are helping us with. So that's something that we did talk to them a little bit about that, but just to make sure that they can provide some explanation, I think would be helpful. Yeah.
Two questions. I usually associate accessibility with ADA. Is that what that means there?
Yeah, yeah. The accessibility here is really about like not ADA accessibility, but it's really about like how easy is it for people to get to the places and things that they need to get to.
Yeah, so they're addressing again road design, so that would facilitate where needed.
Yeah, so this is really about like motorways. How easy is it for people to get to from their homes to where they need to go to the doctor or to shop or whatever, and what modes choice do they have in order to get there?
And then my other question would be intermodal, is that component to just the modes that typically thought of transportation, or moving out a little bit to and what I have in mind specifically are trails, things like that. Is that typically doesn't seem to be part of your review.
Trails can be considered if they meet the transportation system like requirements. Like so VITA, this is really a transportation plan, so it has to meet like it would have to meet like the state definition of a transportation project, but it could be considered in that case. It wouldn't necessarily be called, it would probably be called shared use path, but yeah.
But what I'm curious about is in terms of funding, VITA is probably going to put the money on the highway, even if a trail may provide better interview.
Do you know who you should talk to after this meeting? Michael Barnes.
Speak up.
Yeah, but no, so
but it doesn't have to be correct. Yeah, correct.
Those are projects that are been funded for the past 5, 10, 15 years. The local projects VDOT has funded. They're locally derived projects.
Yeah.
There's certainly a rubric in smart scale, where most of the money is large projects. It tends to go towards, you know, things that reduce congestion. A trail, while it can, you can argue about how some of the metrics score in the rubric smart scale, and you know they say it's slightly discriminated. It's a trail that's not associated with the roadway coordinate, right? But if you have a shared, most of our projects have a shared use path component with the roadway.
That's certainly one. And it's not just you, because and I don't think Parks and Rec on that.
That may be true too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, not think too far away, but there's not enough money to do everything we want. So the state can't always, and the federal government can't always be the last arbiter of the feedback.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. No worries. But these are good questions, and I'm sure if you all have these questions that when we get to the public engagement, they will have these questions.
I think this is not a feedback, right?
It is not, no.
But that's the way you sort of phrase just a minute ago. And you gotta be careful because we have train stations, buses, maybe the airport.
It's a VDOT ERPT, you know, it's federally funded.
Well, it's but the reason that this plan is required is because to be eligible to receive funding for any of these transportation projects through the state, it has to show up in the plan.
I understand that,
yeah.
but that does not show up necessarily to be done. That's my question.
And one more time. So all the smart scale projects we're working on, they were nominated by a locality. Okay. So the locals are putting these things up for smart scale. VDOT is funding them against the rubric that, you know, was put together. So, and yeah, just be clear, you know, it's, you don't like the projects, it's because you don't like what Charlottesville or Albemarle is nominating for projects. You know what I mean?
It's money directly from the federal government. Is that going to this plan?
No, but what I'm saying, it's what he's talking about is a transportation element. It's just a transportation element that's off the road. And for that case, in order for that kind of transportation connection to be eligible for funding through the state, it has to meet a transportation. It has to meet the transportation requirements for VDOT. You're correct. You are correct that we can include other things that aren't going to be VDOT funded projects in this plan, like the ramp and the air.
I'm not. For example, if we approve the train station, that's not a VDOT project. So it would be in the plan.
Yeah, that would probably go into the DRPT category, but yeah. But the airport isn't. Yeah. This plan can do other things, but the primary objective of it is to help us prioritize the projects that we want to.
The big infrastructure bill and they're giving out money and not necessarily clear that it's all going to a VDOT. It should be going to the county or to the city, and we should be characterizing things that are not necessarily VDOT road oriented. Road oriented, not necessarily VDOT. That's what I'm really.
Sure. Yeah.
No, I guess maybe a better question is like for the other possibility through the FTA or Federal Aviation Agency. Like, is the long range transportation plan referenced at all, or does that go through other prioritization?
So to the best of my understanding, I'm going to reach out to the airport and I'm going to talk to them about that. But I don't think that they have the same requirement that in order to qualify for funding, that their projects have to appear in this plan the same way that it does to qualify for funding for the road.
So that's why the right project takes precedence for this particular document.
Yeah. Yeah.
Narrowing our options in terms of consider, other options. I'm not sure yet what those are. You have to go back to the federal government, maybe see. So you want to use consultants. Funding.
That was that was part of our scope for what they'll provide. Yeah.
I am kind of follow the new federal money that's coming out. Does that go to, like, does that money help fund these types of projects, or are those earmarked for the specific other things? Right? So some of that money is used in these projects.
Yes.
And some will be used for other things, also related to the Department of Transportation. Transportation projects.
Yeah, so some of them are for very specific programs, electric vehicle deployment or infrastructure deployment, carbon reduction.
If we include that in here, then that money could.
If we include that in there, basically, if we put it in here, it just helps us identify it as a transportation priority that could be pursued through something besides the kind of standard channels. It doesn't necessarily bring more money to us, it just helps us identify it as an opportunity.
And maybe help you integrate it a little bit. train station, things you mentioned, you know,
Yeah.
but may not necessarily be funded by VDOT.
Right, that's really.
But that was included in our scope for the to help us know kind of what are other funding resources that we should consider as we develop our other priorities.
Not to add another layer here, but would it be helpful to have like the overall mission of this plan, like improve the quality of life of Charlottesville residents, visitors? Like, does that help conceptualize it for the public that they act on it, or is that just another layer that complicates what this is?
That's a good question for the group.
I mean, it's kind of like, I already forget what it's called.
Mission statement.
Mission statement.
Is that, love that name, but is it that the people need to understand something between that and these goals, or it's let's just keep moving and that's necessary?
Like a purpose statement.
Yeah.
I might have something in the works to write that on. Cool. Any other comments?
No.
That's it. Thank you all.
All right, well, I haven't needed that. We move on to any additional matters from the public, or any additional matters from this public. Any members of the public out there visiting? No. All right, well then now.
What's that?
The